Hey everyone, welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Russell Martin and Brent Aiken. We are glad you're joining us today, and we hope that you find this conversation helpful, insightful, and encouraging as you lead your students in ministry. We wanted to stop and take a second to remind you about our social media. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Talk Student Men. And then you can also find us on our website, www.studentministryconversations.org. Today, we are going to hear a conversation that Russell had with David Odom. He's an author, a youth ministry professor, and researcher, and they are going to sit down to talk about the three arenas of youth ministry. Russell, can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, so when we come in to do youth ministry, we go to a church, a lot of times we focus on the students, and that is definitely important. But David talks about the importance of also focusing on parents and on focusing on the church as a whole, and how when you look at those three different arenas of youth ministry and you put emphasis and time in those, it yields great results. And so it's a great conversation, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
Man, that sounds great. Without further ado, here's Russell's conversation with David Odom.
Great.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. We are so excited this week to have David Odom with us. And so, David, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and also what we're talking about today?
Well, first, thank you for having me on the podcast, and I'm excited about being here. I'm David Odom. I'm currently serving as Associate Professor of Student Ministry at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary in New Orleans, Louisiana. My background is youth ministry. Youth ministry is my life. I served in local church for over 25 years before moving into to teaching. But served in local churches. You know, some of those were full-time youth ministry position. Other times it was a combination position, and even before that, of course, volunteering. So I have a passion for youth ministry and for reaching teenagers, and now helping train up the next generation of youth leaders.
Well, it's good to talk to you. I mean, we kind of connected through Twitter, and some of the things that you had put up that kind of piqued my interest. And I kind of followed you some more. And so today we're talking about three arenas of youth ministry. And so I could try to explain what this is, but you are the one who is writing it and doing it. Can you tell us a little more about those three arenas, and then we'll dive into those a little more specifically?
Okay, great. So when I'm talking about youth ministry arenas, I should say from the very beginning here that it's not a concept that I came up with. My mentor and friend, Richard Ross, in his book several years ago, wrote a book called Student Ministry That Lasts a Lifetime. And in that book, Ross outlines and describes the arenas. And what we're talking about here are really the domains in which youth leaders operate. And so you can think of it in terms of time spent doing something, right? For most of the history of youth ministry, the primary arena has been teenagers in the youth group. Okay, right? It's youth ministry, so it makes sense that we're spending our time with teenagers. The problem is that what we've been seeing in the last 15, 20 years, all the way back from the National Study of Youth and Religion through Sticky Faith Research and others, even Lifeway's research just a few years ago saying that 66% of teenagers who are active in their youth groups leave their youth group, and many leave the church and some their faith. That's a big percentage, 66% of our active teenagers. And so it's identifying an issue. It's identifying a problem, which I think is that if we put all our eggs in one basket, so to speak, and focus solely on the teenagers themselves, I think we're really missing some key elements and some necessary parts of our youth ministry in order to develop lifelong faith in students beyond high school. So if teenagers in the youth group is the first arena, the second arena would be teenagers and families. All right. This has been kind of a hot topic and a popular topic in the last several years as we've been talking about parent and family ministry. But I don't know if this was your experience or not, but when I was in seminary and early in my ministry, whenever we would talk about parent ministry, what I heard was that what you needed to do was make sure you have like a quarterly parent meeting, right? To let parents know what you're doing and what you're planning to do ministry and programming with their kids. Now, I know that's not what they intended parent ministry to be, and certainly it's not what we understand true parent ministry to be, not just simply the youth leader informing parents. Certainly there's a component of that, but we want to make sure that we are doing all we can to really engage with moms and dads. And the reason we do that is because, again, research points back to the fact that parents, moms and dads, are the primary influencer of their teenagers' faith, both positive and negative, both for Christ and the gospel and away from that, right? And so it makes sense that we would want to then influence the influencer, to have an opportunity to speak into the heart and lives of moms and dads, to positively impact them because they have the greatest influence on their teenager. So that's the second arena. The third arena is the congregation, the church itself, the members of the congregation. And, honestly, I think that we do a great job in ministry where we, drawing students to our youth ministries and to our church and that kind of thing. And we do a good job of helping students fall in love with the youth group, but they don't necessarily fall in love with the church. And for our students to develop lifelong faith beyond high school, we need to help students understand how connection to the congregation is vital to their own spiritual growth. And so that's really the three arenas in a nutshell.
So I just want to kind of restate one of the things you said. When you talked about the percentage of youth that were leaving, that's not inactive youth. That's not those who were marginally involved. That is our highly active, involved church leadership youth on your praise team, on your leadership team, those who are really, really involved. Is that correct?
That's right. And so, right, active youth leaving and not being involved. And, we've seen other surveys that have other percentages, 70% and even higher. But it is alarming. It's concerning. And I think that the research that's helpful is to help us to see and identify what are some things that we can do. And that's what this research has been based on, the fact that identifying these other two arenas helps us
involved in youth ministry.
To better
I was a youth pastor
prepare and equip
for the past
students to
25 years
remain,
or so.
to stay
we had the way
in
we
the church,
did things,
stay
right?
connected
We had the
to the
way that
church
we
and
went
stay
about doing
connected
youth
to their
ministry
faith.
with programs on Sunday or Wednesday and yuck games and pizza nights and all the fun stuff and also the serious stuff. But is there something that we missed or that we're seeing now that we got wrong as we were doing ministry? Just something maybe that the research now is showing us that maybe we could have done a different way or handled things differently or gone about it in a specifically different way than we have?
Well, I think that we, in youth ministry, traditional youth ministry, where we have been spending most of our time with students, I think that we really, I think that the youth ministry that that we're thinking of the traditional youth ministry was really designed for a church and a culture that no longer exists. I think that when we think in terms of the traditional youth ministry of years past, where we were spending most of our time with youth ministry, then some of the work that, as I'm talking about these three different arenas, some of that work was maybe happening in a more robust way than it is now. And so perhaps there was in years past a greater opportunity for moms and dads to be trained up and discipled. Perhaps there was even, depending on our church and our culture, an opportunity for students to gain a connection, an understanding of how vitally important church is beyond their youth group. And so I think it's difficult for us to look back and to say and to think, okay, what was working in the past that maybe isn't today. I think just what's clear is that our current approaches, if we're focusing on just one of these three arenas, are really lacking. And I think that that's what research is bearing out. That if we'll give attention to some of these areas, then I think we have a better chance, a higher opportunity, a better opportunity to reach students.
Yeah, I mean, so David, I know that most people listening to this, they may look at their job description and say, I was hired to be a youth minister or a youth director. What do you say to them whenever you're talking about, you need to focus on your youth group, but there's also these other areas that need your attention and are actually vital to your youth ministry as part of what you do?
I think that when I think about maybe my own ministry as well, and over the years, and just kind of thinking and reflecting back on some of the things in my own ministry, I know that there even in my conversations with folks, there is a sense in which some say that when you're talking about the arenas, you're really talking about areas that are outside of maybe the purview of youth ministry, and some are critical of an approach that would combine or expand the view of youth ministry to say, well, that's someone else's job. But and I understand that. I understand that we're talking about working with the adults and connections with the congregation intergenerationally and those types of things. But I also believe that youth ministers are uniquely positioned to exert a tremendous amount of influence both on moms and dads and on various aspects of the church to help the church as a whole understand the value of teenagers and vice versa. So I think that just having a slightly expanded view of youth ministry to include these other arenas is valuable to anyone, regardless of the size of the church and regardless of whether they're paid or not, whether it's full-time or part-time. If we would expand our view of ministry a little bit to say, okay, maybe I could consider the benefits of these other connections.
All right. So we talked about the three arenas. You told us kind of what those are. So if I'm a youth leader and I'm hearing this, maybe go into a more on each one. What are some examples of how youth ministries are programming? What fits in one arena that doesn't fit in the other? What are some of the crossover things like that? So can you tell us just each arena and some maybe specific examples and some more in-depth insight in those?
Okay, great. Yeah, that's excellent. So I like to talk about in each of the arenas really kind of two primary areas, and it's relationship and service. That what we found in our research is that regardless of the arena, this teenagers and youth group, teenagers and families, teenagers and congregation, that their key components were relationships that were being built and developed and service. And so I'll talk about those two things in each. So in youth ministry, we of course know about that we're all about developing, relationships with our students. We want to get to know them, want to understand them, want to let them know that we care for them. And so I like to say that, true discipleship can only take place in the context of relationships. So if we're wanting to see our teenagers discipled and grown in their faith, then we've got to develop relationships personally that we have with students, or certainly by extension, the relationships that we encourage our volunteer leaders to have. Maybe we have small groups, right? And there are other other leaders that are serving in our youth ministry. And so we're encouraging these folks to develop these godly relationships with students, because it's in that context of developing those relationships they have an opportunity for discipleship that would involve, I mentioned small groups. And so we think of Bible studies, small groups, any opportunity for there to be an opportunity for students to get to know one another and adults to interact. And really, there is a sense that we, of course, are modeling faith to our students, right? We become the example that we're looking and asking them to follow. And so we have to remember how important that is in our own personal walk, that we're modeling the faith that we are desiring for them to emulate in their own life. So relationships with students becomes key, and that involves all the different things that we do in youth ministry, where it's the fun and games, the trips, the different things that we do with student ministry. Certainly from a programming standpoint, I mentioned small groups, but also in our maybe any kind of youth worship or youth Bible study or large group gathering, there are those opportunities as well. And those relationships are going to be maybe different depending on how we interact with folks and how we connect with some students. That's one of the reasons why we need volunteers. We need others in our youth group, because maybe my personality is not going to connect with everyone, right? My interest or the thing, how God has made me aren't necessarily going to connect as well or easy with everyone in my youth ministry. So I need adults and other volunteers to come in and to help make those connections. The other area is service. And so when I think about service, I want to find as many ways as possible to get my students involved in serving in some way. I want them to be serving in a local congregation. Maybe they are volunteering in the nursery, right? Or they're helping out Vacation Bible School, these types of things. They're maybe serving in some way in the youth group, maybe behind the scenes or up front in a youth worship band. However, I can get my students involved in service and ministry helps them to develop a sense of ownership for the ministry itself. So those are a couple of examples in the youth group. When we move over to teenagers and families, and we begin to think about parent ministry, here's where I think we can also be strategic in the relationships that we're developing. So I certainly want to know the moms and dads of my students. And some of the ways that I would do that, those that are connected to our church, I would make sure that I'm seeing them before and after services. Maybe even if there are opportunities within my own youth ministry to say on a Sunday morning, maybe the students are going to their small groups, and rather than me doing something else or heading to my office or something like that, then I just go to the adult Sunday school, adult Bible study for a few minutes and say hi and kind of be seen, and have an opportunity to interact with moms and dads before and after church. Those are just some intentional steps that we can do. And then certainly some of the things that we already intentionally do in youth ministry, where we're going to ball games and we're going to events and we're going to choir performances and all those things that we do. But rather than just meet the students and say hi to them, I want to be intentional about going and sitting with and talking to moms and dads. And then, of course, pre-pandemic, we would think in terms of the personal visits that we would make to people's homes. And with coronavirus, it makes it a little more difficult to make those personal connections. And so we have to rely on technology like Zoom or text messages or phone calls, those kind of things. But I want to be intentional to try to develop those relationships as best as possible. One of the best things that I found in my own ministry context and examples in our research were when folks would develop programs or opportunities for moms and dads to develop relationships. One example is to have something, for lack of a better term, I say a parent support group. Now, we're not saying that teenagers are some addiction that we've got to get rid of or something like that. But I think that it really gets to the heart of where a lot of mom and dads are. And is that they're hurting, they're struggling. they're trying to figure out how to raise a teenager, right? And they're trying to figure out what it means to, be a parent here in 2020 and through all the things that are going on. So parents have questions about social media and about technology use. They have questions about curfew and, discipline and all these things that moms and dads struggle with. And whatever you and I can do in ministry to help provide some support to moms and dads, I think is a win. And so one way to do that is to simply organize a gathering. Maybe it's once a month, and you're saying we want to invite all the moms or dads or both of teenagers to come, and we're going to gather at some place, and we're just going to have an opportunity to talk and share, pray, and it's not necessarily going to be even a Bible study per se, as much as it is an opportunity for moms and dads to talk about and share with one another in these various areas. And I've just found that this is very helpful to a lot of folks, and even people who aren't connected to my church or involved in small group or even Christians see the value of having an opportunity to hear what others are doing, and kind of have a sounding board, an opportunity to share ideas and to talk. And what I've also found is that even if I am maybe a younger minister and I don't yet have teenagers myself, sometimes we feel that disconnect, right? If I'm in my 20s or even early 30s and I don't have kids or my kids are young, it's difficult for me to maybe relate to what the needs are of someone in their 40s or 50s who have teenagers, right? And I just want to encourage everyone that you may not be, a parent of a teenager, so maybe you're not considered maybe an expert in parenting teenagers, but you certainly, as a youth leader, as a youth minister, are an expert in teenagers and teen culture. And so you do have a lot to be able to share with moms and dads. And so in this type of situation where I'm just serving as a facilitator role, right? I'm not necessarily even going to be, saying this is what I think you should do or whatever. I'm just going to say, let's open that up to the group and hear what others have to say. Another way to approach this is to look for a mom and dad in your church who maybe have grown children who are in their late 20s or early 30s. And those children of this couple grew up in the church or grew up in the youth ministry, and they're still active in their faith, maybe active in your church. They're a great example for other parents of teenagers, right? And so you recruit them and ask them to come and maybe help facilitate this group to help them to see you have an opportunity to mentor and to help train up the parents of our teenagers today. So those are just a couple of ways that I've in my own ministry and then in talking with those in research have found to apply this arena of youth ministry to parents and teenagers and families to our local churches.
So that's the parents. You talk about the arena of the youth student ministry. You talked about the arena of parents and families, but there's one more arena that you have, and that's with the church body as a whole. Is that correct? So what are some of the ways, or how do we facilitate that or dive deeper into that aspect of this?
So what we found was that relationships and service. And so I want to do all I can to help my teenagers develop intergenerational relationships, right? So I want to introduce them to some of the senior adults in my church. Maybe I have some type of a program that I put together where senior adults are praying for students in my youth group by name, right? We give them a name. Maybe there's an opportunity to have fellowships and connections with senior adults. So that's one example. Another is service. So that if my teenagers are serving in the church, then I want to make sure that they're not just serving, alongside just other teenagers, but they are serving alongside other church members. And so they have an opportunity to see what it means to serve Christ through the ministries at our local church. And so anything that I can do to involve teenagers in the various ministries, whether it's serving in a media ministry or, as an usher or, I mentioned kids ministries, whatever it might be, but that they're serving alongside of other members of the congregation. And that added element is helping that teenager to see that what it looks like to be an adult Christian, an adult believer, and gives them an opportunity to think about and to consider, their own faith development. And so we found service to be a big, major component of that.
That is, I mean, I've read Sticky Faith stuff and Almost Christian, and kind of the slew of books that kind of started doing that critique of the way we have done youth ministry in the past, and that was the big thing was siloed youth ministry. They're all off by themselves, and so I have about 28 years in just youth ministry, and then I've moved on to do. I'm a senior pastor now, but it's youth ministry is still a passion, and I think I can do some different things that I couldn't do in that arena. And so we try to focus on having teens involved and in all aspects of church as opposed to just the youth. But I know that sometimes that's hard, and sometimes you have to kind of fight even the church people. You can be an advocate in that and trying to get those things to happen. When you're looking at, you've done research and you're getting surveys. I took the survey, I did it real quickly, and I was kind of answering it. Halfway through it, I realized I was answering partly as pastor and partly as youth. And so I'll take it again and get a much better assessment of it, and actually give it to my youth directors to do as well. What do you find when you're looking across and you have these sent in? Are there areas that youth groups across the board are excelling in and doing great? Are there areas that are deficient? Are there any trends that you see that if someone's listening going, oh yeah, okay, I'm not doing great, but I'm, and not that we're comparing, but at least I'm in good company and we can all work on this together.
Right. That's great. Well, let me just share a few of the results. Okay. So what we found is that that most 54%, so over half of youth leaders who took our initial survey that the online assessment is based on now, 54% scored in the average range. Okay, so that just the scoring is high, medium, and low. So that medium or average range. And so I think that we see that most of us would be in that medium range, that we're doing okay in each of the arenas. And what we found is it would actually the same type of percentages breaks down across all three. So we had a large percentage, just over 50%. That scored about average in teenagers in the youth group and across the board, teenagers and families and teenager congregation. So only 24% scored in the high range, meaning that they scored high in all three arenas. And so that gives us an indication that certainly there are folks that are excelling, and doing well in all three arenas. But most are, would admit to say, okay, maybe there are some areas that I'm not, doing as much as I could. And I think that that's really the beauty of the assessment. It's not necessarily to bring judgment, and to say, you're doing a horrible job, but to try to identify some areas of improvement, right? To identify some areas that if I could take an honest assessment of my own ministry to say, okay, I can see where there's some truth in this, and I can see where maybe some small tweaks to my approach to ministry could result in some significant changes in each of these three arenas.
And this kind of leads in with that, but kind of what do you hope that youth directors get out of this? If I'm taking this, why are you? What question does this answer? What's the value to me? And then also, kind of how does it help? I mean, you talk about assessing, but what are the ways that I use that? Once I take that, once I get my results, and I get back and I look at it, how does it help me as a youth leader? And talking about discipleship, talking about involvement and service in relationships. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. Well, we definitely think that there's value in looking at and doing some evaluation and being willing to say, okay, let me consider some possible areas of improvement. And so what we built into the online assessment is not only the ability to see your score, but then you can download a free PDF report that is tailored specifically to how you scored on the assessment, and then it gives feedback and some suggestions for improvement. It begins to help you begin to think about, okay, what other areas of ministry to my teenagers, what other connections to moms and dads, and certainly to the congregation. So I think that it gives you an opportunity to think about these in a different way. And really, you ask about the goal. That's really the goal, is to have an expanded view of ministry. I think all too often, or too long, I guess I should say, we've had maybe a more traditional view of youth ministry that is more siloed, that is more specific to only engaging with teenagers. But we're just seeing more and more research that's pointing to the fact that an expanded view of youth ministry is going to be more beneficial to the students in the long run.
And I mean, that is definitely getting that kind of wider view of things. I know when I started off in youth ministry, it was like, hey, just have some things for them to do. I was a summer youth worker. So it was like, hey, have some things for them to do during the week. And like you said, send out the parent newsletter. But going back to those things that you mentioned at the beginning of the active, the amount of students that are active after college, the importance of parents, faith, as far as that faith development. And that's something, I guess I didn't really start hearing, about 10 years ago, somewhere around there when that big study came out. You started hearing these ideas. And so it's, how do you start implementing that? And it expanded my view of my job as a youth director, from being, hey, I'm supposed to keep the kids busy and teach them a little bit about Jesus, and while the parents drop them off and leave, to maybe my time is better spent equipping parents. I kind of went from focusing everything on students to, now I also had volunteers in the ministry. And so it made it a little easier. I could work with them and they were working with my students. But I can imagine some sort of a shock, maybe even for some youth leaders who either didn't understand or weren't listening to that research, or hadn't seen those trends, or just are sitting there going, I only am working, 15 hours a week for whatever I can, pizza I can take home after youth group. So how do I expand out? So if you are speaking to youth leaders, small church or volunteer or bivocational, sometimes it's easy to do these things and have this research and come up with these really elaborate plans and do this if you have a staff or something like that. But a couple of weeks ago, we had Kyle Creel from the Small Town Youth Ministry podcast, and we talked about adapting events that you go and see at youth specialties or books, and adapting those and pulling the essence out for small church. And so my perception is that there will be some of these things that are easier, and some that would be more difficult. So if you were speaking to somebody in that situation, how would you help them and encourage them that these things are still important? It's still important to focus on these, but maybe they need to be adapted, or just some ways that you can think to help somebody implement them.
That's great. Yes, definitely. And I would encourage anyone to maybe even just start small and simply, right? To think in terms of what might I, in the next 3, 6 months, or even year, seek to try to begin establishing some connections to these other arenas. And so maybe it's a parent support group, or maybe it's something different. Maybe it's just simply being more intentional to develop relationships with moms and dads. Maybe there is an opportunity for us to do, instead of a traditional youth mission trip, maybe we do a family mission trip or something, like that. And we begin and we build small. And I think the other interesting thing is that our smaller churches, I think, are uniquely positioned to do each of the arenas very well. That many of our smaller churches, because it's a gathering of families, right? Generally speaking, we can identify key families in our church, that we already begin, have relationships or have an opportunity to get to know folks on a deeper level, because we're not thinking in terms of hundreds or thousands of people, right? We're thinking about the people that we know and can interact with. And I think it's some of our smaller churches that are even better equipped to help students understand their need for connection to the church, because we couldn't do church without them, right? We couldn't do the things that we're doing in our small church without students helping and volunteering and being involved. And so that's just a couple of thoughts, but I think that one of the things we have to try to guard against is to think that, well, I've got to implement this complicated program right away. But I think ideally we think in terms of incremental steps. What might I add? What could I do? What change or tweak to the way I'm doing ministry could I move and take steps towards a greater expanded view of youth ministry?
Yeah, and I think that's important, because you're not offering a program like, here's our curriculum or here's our list of games or anything like that. You're just offering we want you to think bigger about youth ministry. We don't, and whether you use whether it's Grow or Orange or Cokesbury or whatever it is that you use, whatever games you play, whatever mission trips you go on, maybe just think differently. So we do a UM Army, in our church, UM Army United Methodist Action Reach Out Mission by Youth, week-long mission trip, and it's geared toward teens. You have adult volunteers, and so one of the things that I can think of that would be easy, and maybe an example for somebody else listening, is don't just grab the parents of those going or those involved, but maybe look for the grandparents or somebody who has we just had a member in our church who he went on the mission trips, and he was kind of gruff old guy, but whenever they got on the site, they realized that he was this big teddy bear, and he taught them, and his goal was to teach. And so he didn't have kids in the youth group, but he was still of the age where he could go and sleep on the floor and get up in the morning and go out on site. And so it was a great connection, because he connected a whole generation of his church with the youth. And so consider that with your, what is that small little thing that you can change? Something else I could think of is, if you're doing meals for your youth group, you could have the parents provide those, which is great, but you could also have a Sunday school class provide those, and say, hey, y'all just come provide the meal. You don't even have to stay, provide it and clean up. And invariably, a few will stay. We had a lady a couple in our church, my previous church, who they called her Gma, and she, I'm not going to guess her age or say her age, but her kids were all grown and had kids of their own, and she took a small group of high school or boys from like 7th grade through graduation, and she had a couple other co-leaders with her periodically, but she was the main fixture, and she sends them text messages, devotionals, still does it, and they've been graduated for 3 years. And so that's just one of those connections and families, ways to do that. But, well, David, what else do you want to share? I'm sure you had a question that you wanted to cover that I did not get to. What is either a question that I didn't ask that you want me to ask you, or just something else, anything else you want to share on this topic?
Well, let me definitely share the website address for anyone that's interested in taking the online assessment. So our assessment that's available for free online at ymarenas.com. So YM for youth ministry, and then the word arenas, ymarenas.com. The online assessment is based on a pilot study of research that we conducted the last year and a half, 2 years. And we hope that you'll find some value to it. And you'll want to be able to see your score after you take the assessment. It takes about 5-10 minutes. But then make sure you download. There's a link to click to download the free report as well that gives you details on how you scored, and then, as I said, some suggestions for improvement.
Now, who is this for? I think we were talking about who should take this, or I understand that there's something coming in the future as far as who all should take this. So can you kind of tell us who can take it now, and then what you're hoping that you can do with this?
Yes. So it is designed for the youth director, the youth minister, the person who is working with teenagers, regardless of whether you're paid or not, or anything like that. We do have another assessment in the works. Or really, it's the same assessment, but there's coming the option for you to be able to assess several folks, maybe a team of people at your church that work with teenagers, and then that would allow you to have maybe a more broad view of how you're doing in each of the three arenas. It is a self-assessment in the sense that it's your feelings, your perceptions of how you're doing in each area. That's the way the questions are worded. And so you're taking it, and it's kind of a snapshot of the moment, and as you're reflecting on your own ministry. But you can see the value of allowing a pastor or parents or other youth volunteers to also take the assessment. And eventually we're going to have it so you can see all of those scores together in one document and be able to compare a composite view of your overall ministry. But yeah.
That would give you that kind of look of, well, I think I'm doing great, but my parents and my teens and everybody else says not, or a lot of times we're much harder on ourselves than anybody else. And so I think I'm not doing well, but we're like, okay, we are doing well. So I could definitely see the value in that. Well, David, thanks for joining us. Can you let us know, you've already given us a couple of links, but let us know if someone wants more information, wants to connect with you. I know you're active on Twitter, but how else? What are the ways that we can get a hold of you, that you would want us to contact you if somebody wanted more information?
Yes, let me give you my email. My email address is dobts@nobts.edu. And so that's dobts@nobts.edu. And as you said, I'm on social media, so I'd love to interact with you on there as well.
Awesome. Well, David, thank you for joining us, and we will talk to you hopefully later. Hopefully have you come back on. I know you have several things you can talk about, and so we'd love to have you back on and have a conversation again. But for now, it was great to talk to you, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks everyone for joining us today. We hope you were encouraged and inspired by this week's episode, and that you found tools that you can use as you pour into the lives of your students.
Yeah, if you enjoyed this, if you found it helpful, why don't you tell somebody else about it? Go and leave a comment or a rating on the podcast, whatever platform you're listening on. And then also tag somebody on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever you use, tag somebody, let them know about this conversation or about other conversations we've had, and let them know, and so they can learn more about what we're talking about. Also, go check out our website and go to the merchandise page, and there's several t-shirts there. We would love for you to purchase one of those and help us be able to continue to do this podcast and do it even better for the future. So speaking about the future, we have a brand new episode up next week, and Brent, it is yours. So can you tell us a little bit about what we're going to hear?
Yeah, so next week I sit down with Jerry Varner, and he is a youth pastor that's been in the youth ministry game for a while, in fact, since 1995. And so we sit down to talk about longevity in student ministry, both from being in a church for a longer period than just a few years, and then also being a youth pastor as a primary profession for your career. And it's a great conversation. Really, really enjoyed having Jerry on the podcast, and I genuinely think it's one that will be a favorite for many episodes to come.
Well, as always, Brent brings us great conversations, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from Jerry. I had connected with him back on Clubhouse many months ago, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he says about longevity in youth ministry. I definitely know the benefits of that. So just a reminder, go check us out on our website, studentministryconversations.org. There's show notes, there's links from this episode. Just look for this week's episode or any week's episode in the search bar, and you can find that, and also other helpful articles and posts as well. Thank you for joining us this week, and we will see you next time.